Today, you've got slim pickings when it comes to gaming consoles. PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo. Pick one like a starter Pokemon and be on your way. But it wasn't always like this. There used to be tons of consoles to choose from. Atari, Namco, Bandai, and one company that used to be among the top brass was SEGA. In the late 80s and early 90s, the Sega Genesis was competing against the Super Nintendo for the title of the most popular console in the world. They had their own catalog of games, an ad campaign that painted Nintendo as a bunch of squares, and it looked like they were poised to become the favored console, at least in North America. So, when it came time to release a new generation of consoles in the mid-90s, Sega made it their goal to blow Nintendo out of the water. Enter the Sega Saturn, a $399 home console that was capable of competing with arcade-level graphics. Unfortunately, released in 1994, the hardware was a little bit too good, and the price tag of $399 scared most people away. Adding insult to injury, the Sony PlayStation released in 1995, a full $100 cheaper, and the Nintendo 64 released in 1996, causing the Saturn to be a huge financial flop for Sega. With their backs against the wall, Sega had one last chance to turn their fortunes around, and turn to a man they believed could save the company, a Japanese game creator named Yu Suzuki. Nicknamed the Shigeru Miyamoto of Sega, Yu was one of those true visionaries that comes around once in a generation. He was an auteur, an engineer, and kind of a mystic all rolled into one. His most popular game up until that point, Virtua Fighter, is seen by many as the first game to use 3D polygonal people, and his reputation for creating greatness was virtually unmatched. So, needing something special to get their company back on track, Sega reached out to Yu and offered him carte blanche to give him whatever resources he needed to build the game of his dreams. But Yu's approach to game making was a little bit different. In a world where video games were about clearing levels, setting high scores, or beating the person next to you, Yu wasn't satisfied with just making another game. He wanted to create an experience, one that reflected real life in Japan. From the get-go, he made it clear that his goal was to make a game that would transcend genre, a game that was free, in his own words. Originally, he wanted to make a fighting game that followed around Akira Yuki from Virtua Fighter, but the fighting game genre was kind of limiting. So, he settled on an RPG instead, tasking Sega with creating a bespoke game engine for him to realize his dreams, and then went on to hire a diverse team of musicians, writers, and technical staff, which would eventually grow to a team of 300 people. But the first step in Yu's process wasn't what you'd expect from a game maker. It was to simply listen to music. That's it. Sit around, listen to classical music, and get the vibe of the game. With that out of the way, it was time to start creating the world of Shenmue. One of the things Yu was passionate about was 3D models that reflected real life. His work on Virtua Fighter meant he had a lot of experience on the subject, and he was ready to take 3D character models to the next level. At the time, this was the bar for 3D rendered faces, and Yu was dead set on raising that bar exponentially. He started by tasking his artists with creating 2D drawings, then they hired a sculptor to come in and build the models out of clay, then Yu used motion capture technology to model the movements and facial expressions of real people. The end result was something completely mind-blowing in 1999. This level of detail was unheard of in game making, and it was implied throughout the entire game. Every character had 3D modeled faces. You could open any drawer, pick up almost any item and look at it. Yu had the team spend an inordinate amount of time designing several different doors to ensure that buildings felt authentic to what they were like in Japan. They even went as far as creating backstories for every single NPC in the game, including information like age, name, weight, blood type, nationality, how old their wife is, what company they work at, how many days they get off per week. There's so many tiny features in this game that even diehard fans are still discovering new quirks. Unfortunately, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows working for Yu Suzuki. Many employees described coming into work, sitting down for an unplanned meeting, and learning about some brand new idea he had that needed to be in the game. One day it was a gachapon machine stocked with toys from Sonic and Virtua Fighter. Next, he'd ask you to program 365 days of weather, accurately reflecting meteorological records from Yokosuka in 1986. Then, he'd want Ryu to be able to chug a can of Coke. Any of these things would take an incredibly long time to implement, and the scope creep was difficult to manage. Despite a staff of more than 300, the team lacked modern tools for tracking bugs and tasks. Developers would often sleep at the office trying to get bits of the game finished on time, and there was quite a bit of friction between the grand vision Yu wanted to realize and the people below him who were responsible for making it happen. That being said, if Shenmue was going to be good enough to save Sega, maybe that's the kind of visionary thinking they needed. When development for Shenmue began in 1996, it was originally slated to release on the Sega Saturn. However, due to the Saturn's poor sales, Sega turned their hopes to a new generation of console, the Dreamcast. They wanted Shenmue to be a console seller, a reason for gamers to throw Mario 64 and Final Fantasy to the wayside and pick up their console instead. At first, it seemed like their ploy was working. When magazines started publishing pictures of Shenmue, the graphics were so realistic, people mistook the screenshots for concept art. When they realized the images were rendered in-game, their minds were blown. No one could believe graphics like these could be rendered in real time, let alone on a home console. But these kind of graphics came at a very real cost. It's estimated that Sega sunk upward of $47 million to develop Shenmue, a total that comes out to nearly $100 million today, adjusting for inflation. Even if Shenmue could move consoles like they wanted, it was going to take a lot of sales for them to recoup their money. Sadly, Sega was dropping the ball, and other factors were putting them in a position to fail before they'd even started. For example, Electronic Arts wanted exclusive rights to sports games on the Dreamcast, but Sega CEO Bernie Stolar said no. He wanted to make his own sports games. In response, EA pulled all of their titles from the Dreamcast, seriously weakening their position since Madden was one of the biggest games in the world at the time. Seeing Sega in trouble, Sony decided to really mess with Sega, announcing the PlayStation 2 around the same time that the Dreamcast released. Seeing the PlayStation 2 right around the corner, a console that would have EA titles, most gamers simply chose to wait it out. Yeah, the Dreamcast is cool, but the PlayStation 2 is going to be even cooler. With this kind of environment, regardless of how good Shenmue actually was, it would take a miracle for it to sell the Dreamcast in any meaningful way. But there was still hope. Shenmue finally released on December 29th, 1999. Yu Suzuki's vision of creating an experience truly came together in the final product. It had everything. Hyper-realistic 3D models, rooms you could enter, and cupboards you could rummage through. It had forklift racing. Yeah, there's nothing quite like heading down to the docks with your boys and ripping around on some heavy machinery. But to many who are used to playing, games, Shenmue was a little bit too out there. The core gameplay loop was walking around Yokosuka asking people questions. Often, you'd have to catch them at a certain time of day, and you might be forced to wait for hours in-game, as Shenmue had no feature to skip time forward. Usually, after spending the whole morning standing around, you'd finally get a chance to talk to the person you'd been looking for, only for them to stare at you blankly and say, I don't know. And that's not even mentioning the English dub for the game, which is infamous.
But Itoi-san, how do you know about the three blades?
Years ago, I was Chinese.
But despite being somewhat clunky, Shenmue was still a great success on paper, selling 1.18 million copies and becoming the fourth most popular game on the Sega Dreamcast. Unfortunately, by the time the game was released heading into the year 2000, Sega had only sold 5.2 million units of the Dreamcast. Doing some quick math, Shenmue cost $47 million to make, games were selling for $50 each, 5.2 million Dreamcast sold by 2000. In order for Shenmue to break even, every Dreamcast owner would have had to buy the game 4 times. It was a mathematical impossibility that Shenmue would break even, let alone save Sega. Yu Suzuki spent years creating this incredible masterpiece, only for it to be released on a console that no one was buying. And less than a year later, Sega announced that the Dreamcast would be their final console. Although this was the end of Sega as a major player in the console wars, it wasn't the end for Shenmue. A sequel released in 2001 as one last hurrah for the Dreamcast before it was discontinued. Shenmue 2 turned out to be a huge improvement from the first game. NPCs would actually lead you to locations, you could skip time forward, there was a mini-map, and the game ended on one of the great cliffhangers in gaming, one that would leave players hanging for 18 long years. For almost 2 decades, fans thought Shenmue 2 was the end of the series. But in 2015, a little thing called Kickstarter changed all that. After raising more than $6.3 million, Yu Suzuki got to work on Shenmue 3. If not for himself, then to do right by all of the fans who wanted one more Shenmue. The game finally released in 2019, and although it was a little old school, described by Martin Robinson in Eurogamer as completely ignorant of modern trends in open world gaming, or indeed trends of the last 20 years, hardcore Shenmue fans didn't mind. They were just excited to get back and live in the world of Shenmue one last time. Today, Shenmue remains a legend. It topped BAFTA's list of the most influential games of all time. It has perhaps one of the most avid, voracious, committed fandoms in all of gaming. The 3D graphics were groundbreaking at the time and still look pretty good even today. The effort put into every little detail was unparalleled, and although it wasn't the commercial success Sega needed it to be, Yu Suzuki did fulfill what he set out to create: an experience, a little piece of Japan frozen in time, a piece of art that really does make you feel free.